Hello, everybody, and welcome to another adventure in history. I hope that you're doing well. I hope that the world is treating you nicely. Um, Lots of folks already in the room. Schmonite, hello. Late Bloomer, welcome, welcome. Nick Slottle, hope that you are doing well. Fogage, how's it going, my friend? Hope the world's being nice to you all. The world is not always nice to everybody. And that stinks. So, I don't know what I'm going with that. I guess I'm just sort of like saying words. Okie dokie. It goes well. That's good to hear. Good to hear. Yeah. So, hello, everybody. It's another Thursday. And that means it's time for history, right? So, tonight, we've got a couple of different groups of people to talk about. We're going to start about talking about Tibet. And I just realized that these notes here are not centered. And that's kind of bothering me. So, I just fixed it a little bit. I'm so OCD sometimes it bothers me. Hello, puppy. We're being visited by a puppy already. Would you like to see the puppy? Come here. Hey. Come see me. Come up here. You know that they can't see you if you come under the table. So the puppy is now currently under the table. Waggling because I can feel her tail like whacking my leg. We are currently puppy sitting my in-laws' dog, and that always makes Kaylee feel especially needy because she's not the firm, fixed center of attention that she normally is. So she always needs additional attention. So she just needs to be spoiled a little bit, I guess. You want to come around here, though? You want to come around here? You can see just like this little puppy head sticking out under the table. Come around here and come see me. Come up here. Come on. Oh, come here. Come here. Come up here. Come up here. Come and see me. Come up here. Come up here. There you go. There's a big puppy. Hello. There you go. What are you up to? Giving me sniffs? You big puppy mess. Was that all that I get? You're gonna talk to me now? Oh my goodness. Boo. Boof. That dog has a lot of character, and I wish I understood the puppy language so that I could get what the devil she's saying, because I suspect it's almost always sarcastic or some sort of admonishment of me not doing what I'm supposed to be doing to fulfill the prophecy or fulfill the proper forms or some such. Who knows? I am not like what I would call crippling level OCD, but there are definitely things that bother me. I'm to the point of OCD where I don't think I could get a tattoo because it would have to be like perfectly in the center. Even if it was slightly off, I would recognize it and it would bother me. And you know, like even if I tried to get the same thing like on both shoulders or, you know, both forearms or something like that, I would stare at it until I tried to find some minuscule minor difference, and that would be the only thing that I would look at that point, because that's just the way that my brain works. I don't like for things to be out of order. I'm very sort of habit forming. I like to do the same things kind of in order. Like if I'm going to Uh, like in the morning when I wake up, I do the same things in order, and I have the same thing for breakfast just about every single day, and I have the same thing for lunch just about every day. Uh, and when I'm at school and I'm teaching stuff, I tend to uh, fall into this set schedule of a day, and I try to schedule all of my classes at the same time, and it's more of a comfort zone kind of thing. It's kind of like I like things to be predictable, and if they're not predictable, it bothers me. I don't know if that's more obsessive compulsive, or if that's just more anxiety, or who knows. What's up, Tuna? Good to see you, man. Still at work. I'll yell really loud and get you in trouble. I'm just picking. Hope you're doing well. All right, so tonight we get to talk about some interesting stuff that is one of those things that kind of tends to get left off of the standard historical, survey class. And that's very sad, because a lot of the stuff that gets, well, I think I don't have to go through all the stuff. You all figured out that at this point, I just love all of history. But there's some really cool stuff that gets sort of tossed in the, we have only got one semester to cover half of world history kind of sprint thing, right? You're in control of the volume. Shout as much as you want. I control the vertical and the horizontal, right? I eat the same thing every day, usually lasts for a couple of months. Yeah, I've been on the same breakfast now for about 5 years. And I've been on the same lunch, more or less, for about the same 5 years. No, I've been on the same breakfast for longer than that. Probably 8 or 9 years for the same breakfast. And the same lunch is only about 5 years, because I changed jobs and lost access to the school cafeteria. I guess I have access to the school cafeteria where I eat now, but it's a lot further away across campus, and they charge me a lot of money to eat there. What's up, JMR? Good to see you. So breakfast is almost always a granola bar. The only deviations from breakfast, if I'm not having a granola bar, is if my wife surprises me and makes pancakes, or if I wake up really, really, really late and don't have breakfast. Sometimes I will have like a heavier brunch, which is typically a bowl of cereal. Cereal to me is dinner. I eat cereal for dinner quite a bit. I don't typically eat cereal for breakfast unless I've slept past my normal breakfast time, and then it's like 11 or 10 or something like that, and I want to have a heavy breakfast to sort of hold me over through lunch. I'm not a hobbit. Because, what's up, Cave? We're talking about my breakfast habits because I mentioned that I eat the same thing for breakfast, and I've been eating the same thing for breakfast for about 8 years. I don't have second breakfasts. I'm not a hobbit. I don't eat 8 times a day. And then breakfast, that's usually around the same time every day, somewhere between 8:45 and 9 o'clock. And then lunch is almost always at 12:30, and I have some version of sandwich, and it's almost always turkey on wheat with maybe a slice of cheese. Or breakfast hobbits. I'm not big enough to consume an entire hobbit for breakfast. That would be more along the lines of a hill troll. You'd probably have to find one of those. We know that 3 hill trolls can consume roughly 13 dwarves worth of food. I love that sliced bread called sunflower flax. I've never seen that. Mine is usually like the cheapest local grocer's brand wheat bread that I can find. 13 dwarves. And that's a reference to the Hobbit, where, of course, the dwarves get captured by the trolls, and the trolls are sitting around debating how they're going to eat the dwarves. And then the sun comes up and turns them to stone. And, of course, then they are found once again in Lord of the Rings, when Aragorn is leading the four hobbits into Rivendell after Frodo gets stabbed on Weathertop. So, those trolls. All right. Anyway, though, we are gonna talk a little bit about Tibet, which is something that we've mentioned a couple of times previous weeks in stream, but we have not talked about specifically yet at all. My day was okay. I made a little bit of progress on something. I got... I went to see the guy that I'm working on a research paper with, the guy that I went to Turkey with for a little bit, and we talked about that paper, and I got a little bit of a better direction on how we're going to approach writing the paper, but I'm now basically full in charge of writing. What's that song? What's what song? You're gonna put you to bet. I put you to bet. I don't know that one, Late Bloomer. I'm sorry, I'm missing it. A lot of music to me is lyrical, so like if you sang it to me, I could maybe pick up the tune. But this is a pun of Little Red Corvette by Prince. Little Red Corvette. If that's what you were after. I mean, it wasn't a bad day. I don't feel like I accomplished anything, and I feel like I wasted a lot of the day, which is troubling because I really only have like a week and 4 days left of summer vacation before I have to go back to work. But I did read a lot of Lord of the Rings. I'm currently reading through Lord of the Rings for the 30th time. And I read a substantial part of Two Towers today. So, I guess that's something. Rest is never a waste of time. Well, maybe not waste of time. Maybe I feel guilty about not doing other things. I don't know. It's a weird day. You're looking forward to learn about Tibet. You don't know much about Tibetan history. Yeah, most people don't tend to. And a lot of that is because, again, this is a topic that just gets kind of glossed over in Western history, or not even mentioned at all until we want to talk about something like the Dalai Lama, or we want to talk about the expansion of communist China. And then we're like, and they conquered Tibet. And like, well, what does that even mean? And people are like, free Tibet. And that's all well and good, but why? What's the deeper emphasis here? Well, that's going to start tonight, and let's actually kind of get at it. So, what's up with this region that we call today Tibet? So, if we look at the old map here, Tibet is sort of a hard to define region, but broadly speaking, if we include this region of Highland sort of right here, and then all the way here along the Himalayan mountain range, down into sort of this region right here, and then up around into here. So the sort of larger shape that you can see, that's sort of delineated by regional boundaries, geographic boundaries. That's sort of what Tibet is going to become. Now, when we first meet our adventurers, there are not a lot of what we might call political entities that are established in Tibet. Now, if you ask the Tibetans, when did you become an empire? They will tell you that they had an empire going all the way back to the 2nd century BC. They put the foundation of their empire the year 127, and they say that they had this long line of emperors, and they even have like all of the names of all of the emperors. Here's the thing, though. We can't prove any of those people existed. There's not archaeological evidence to support that all of these particular people existed. There's not even really a lot of unified cultural evidence that a lot of these supposed emperors of the past existed. But we do know that there are people in this area, right? It is not just an empty wasteland of nothing. There are people. But mostly what we can suppose this term meant was chieftain. That would probably be a much easier word to prove in context, that there were people that were chieftains going back that far. And that's pretty easy to suppose. But if you're looking for an imperial capital in Tibet from the year 127 BC, you're not going to find it because it didn't really exist. So who were these people in the first place? Well, they were a group of mostly nomadic herdspeople. And they're herding sheep and horses and also yaks. So the good old-fashioned, really shaggy cow-looking thing that we call a yak comes from this region. It was one of their staple domestic products. So they're mostly going to be in these little valleys. So if we sort of zoom in here on this region, you can tell just by looking at it that there is a lot going on here geographically speaking. We've got all sorts of elevation changes. We do have quite a bit of water. Now, of course, some of this water is going to be runoff from snows. They do have fairly heavy winters in a lot of these regions. Of course, the Himalayan mountains, being the tallest mountain range in the world, is going to give us some of that. But you can see over here in this region, sort of in the southeastern corner, they've got some pretty green zones. But even so, there are going to be lots of these valleys and lots of these river valleys and mountain ranges that are separating the groups of people. So if we are being honest with the evidence, which we always try to be here on the show, these people are probably going to be small herdsmen that are living in what we might call extended family units or clans of groups that might be somewhere between 200, 300 people, and they're mostly going to be moving around in these valleys. So how then do we end up with what we might call a Tibetan empire? Well, that's why it takes kind of a while for this to build up. If we look at, let's say we go back to that 2nd century time period, like 127, and we look at the region right around Tibet, we've got empires going on over here in China, we've got empires going on over here in India, we've got Central Asian empires, we've got, of course, the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire, and there's a lot of stuff. Well, I guess in 127 we would technically be in the Roman Republic, but they controlled a large portion of territory. You know what I mean, right? We've got the Seleucid Empire, the Ptolemaic Empire, etc., etc. But Tibet wasn't. And part of that is because, again, the geography is going to limit their population growth. It's not going to be very easy for these people to make a living. They do develop and bring in from the outside some agricultural crops, like planting fields and things of that nature, but they're not necessarily going to be able to grow the really big staple crops of the surrounding regions, right? You're not going to find a lot of rice cultivation in Tibet, mostly because the climate just doesn't support wet rice cultivation. They grow a lot of what we might call hardy pulses, which are these really heavy-duty grains, things like sorghum. You see some of that come on. Hey, Lumpy, what's up? Good to see you. So they're going to have problems with producing surplus amounts of food. They're also going to be limited by the fact that, again, they are mostly nomadic in nature. And just because it's hard to live in this place to begin with, these are going to be things that sort of naturally put a damper on large population growth in Tibet. But if we fast forward to a little bit before the 7th century, we're going to see some substantial population growth. We are going to see some cities that are becoming sort of big hubs for these nomadic people groups. So we have some sedentary life that is being supported by larger sort of satellite nomadic groups. You are exhausted, but real life is going very well. Well, that's great. Sometimes there's good exhaustion where you've done really great work, you've gotten through the day, and you're like, holy crap, that was awesome, but I'm tired, but I'm good. And I hope that's where you are, Lumpy. It's good to hear that. They didn't have a big river to support agriculture. Well, they had some rivers, but not anything really, really big, right? They don't have the Ganges, or they don't have the Indus, or the Yangtze, or the Yellow River, or the Nile. They have Mesopotamia, right? So they have water, but they don't have the big, sort of turbo rivers. What's up, Blue? Yes, we're talking about Tibet. And we're about to specifically mention a pretty important valley. The Yarlung Valley. And if we go to the photos, this is what the Yarlung Valley looks like. So you can tell here that we've got some pretty rugged mountains. These are not mountains that would, carry a lot of what you might call wild game. You're not going to see lots of roaming deer or, big animals, because this is all grazing land. And you see here the big valley where they have started doing some agriculture. Of course, this is a modern photo, right? But this particular valley, the Yarlung Valley, is going to be important because that's where our first big dynasty of Tibet is going to begin. Due to legal reasons and the need to not go to jail, I will not talk about my view. Blue, I understand. If I recall correctly, you might be visiting the stream from Hong Kong. And if that is the case, yeah, my friend, I completely understand. I'll say it for you if you want me to. Or maybe I shouldn't say it because I don't know. So the Yarlung Valley. It is important because it's going to give us sort of the first dynastic-minded dynasty group, clan, family, whatever you want to call them. And they also take the name of their valley. So this is the Yarlung dynasty. And these are the people that are going to claim that they have the lineage that goes back into the 2nd century BC. But they're not really historically identifiable until the early 500s. And they're not even really conclusively identifiable until we get to this guy named Namri Songtsen. You lived in Kowloon for a year in 2013. Very, very cool. Yep. I'm glad that you got to see that, and I know that you mentioned that you are also glad that you were there while things were better. I would love to go to Hong Kong. It's a cool place. It's got interesting and unique history that I would enjoy taking in, and I think the culture is pretty cool too. But Namri Songtsen, he is going to be a ruler in Tibet, and he's going to sort of begin his movement towards trying to unify the different tribes about 570. So I know that we're talking about the 7th century, but he does live and rule till 618. And it's pretty important for us to talk about him because he's sort of the founder. Now, His dad was a pretty important tribal and clan leader in the region who is going to sort of later become one of the emperors, right? But Namri is going to be the guy that really sort of gets the ball rolling in the right way. And he is going to be one of the first Tibetan clan leaders that starts to expand territory. And he does this in the very late 570s. But he's going to do this sort of piecemeal, right? He's not always doing this by military conquest, though he does have a military. It's fairly small, but let's remember that the population groups that he would be going up against are also fairly small. So when he can boast that he has an army that has 5,000 soldiers in it, that's fairly substantial, right? Because 5,000 soldiers can do a lot of damage to these nomadic clans that might be 200 people in total. And that's including children, women, old people, 5,000 soldiers in the Tibetan valleys is a pretty scary sight. And when Namri starts doing his expansion, he does a little bit of fighting, but he also does a lot of diplomacy. And one of the reasons why it makes sense during this period of time for Namri to be interested in this kind of larger Tibetan presence has a lot to do with what's going on in China. At this period of time, China was unifying under the Sui dynasty, right? And China had not really been unified for about 200 years. It's a little bit less than 200 years, but you know what I'm saying, right? So this was starting to kind of put a little bit of pressure on the Tibetans. Also, there was this pressure from the north with lots of other groups that were kind of in the Chinese orbit, and we'll talk about the Go-Turks a little bit at the end of the stream. But there's also the Tuyahun, and there are also the Persians, and there are also leftover Hephthalites, and there are all of these people groups that are running around in Central Asia. And while Tibet was not necessarily going to be seen as some sort of crown jewel, it made sense that the leaders there would want to kind of get in on that larger game. Because even when China was disunified, one of the biggest things that was going on in this region, of course, is trade. And the Silk Road that connected China to Central Asia over here was making a killing, and this ran right on the border of Tibet, right? So if Tibet could unify and they could extend their pressure and their presence into these areas, maybe they could get a little bit of that sweet, sweet trade action, right? So Namri has some good logic behind trying to get everybody together, and he can convince a lot of the people to sort of join up with him through diplomacy, but he's also going to do some fighting and sort of knock some heads. Out of curiosity, was this during the Three Kingdoms period? No. So the Three Kingdoms period is fairly far before this. So that is mostly going on in the 300s and then a little bit into the 400s. So Namri is about 150 years after that. So the Jin dynasty, who was originally the kingdom of Wei that won the Three Kingdoms War, dissolved and had its last emperor in 420. So that was sort of the end of the Jin dynasty, but of course they ruled for quite some time into the 300s. And if depending on how you date the Three Kingdoms period, some of the collapse of the Han dynasty stuff started back in the 200s, right? So it's been a mess for a while in China. But the Sui dynasty, which takes over in 581, is going to be sort of the gravity well of that area at the moment. And as always, if anybody has any questions about this stuff, previous stuff, post stuff, or just anything, feel free to throw that stuff in. You don't have to feel bad about asking questions, even if it's not really on topic, because I'd rather have you ask your question and let me answer it than necessarily just talk at you. I'd rather talk with you, right? It's around this time as well that we're going to start seeing this guy show up. So this is the Tibetan snow leopard flag, which is going to become sort of the official flag of the Tibetan Empire. The red here is very symbolic, as are the sun and the moon and the other colors as well. Of course, the snow leopard being a mountain creature that lives in the snow, that is a fierce predator. That's going to be a really cool thing to kind of invoke on your flag here. But the red is actually fairly important, which is sort of playing into the pun in the title. Red is a sacred color to the Tibetan people. And if you know a lot about what becomes later on, like Tibetan Buddhism, and you see pictures of the Dalai Lama, he's always wearing a red, like red clothes, or his red habit, or his monk's get up. It's almost always red, because that is part of their larger thing. And one of the things that was very popular to do for things like court functions or public gatherings was to paint your face red in different designs and stuff like that. That does not look like a snow leopard. It looks like a chupacabra. After diplomacy failed, he used some aggressive negotiations. Correct, except he didn't have a lightsaber. Right? So aggressive negotiations, or negotiations with a lightsaber, he was using his army instead. They didn't invent lightsabers in Tibet until several hundred years after the stream tonight. You got to give them a little bit of leeway. Let's remember that they're sort of just getting their act together. All right, so Namri is doing some expansion. He is doing some diplomacy. He really wants to start getting in on this trade, so we start seeing Tibetans pop up in places like China, places like India, and even places like Persia. All right, so let's remember the Sassanid Persians are controlling this big region right here, which is right next door to Tibet, and they control sort of the part of the trade route of the Silk Road that connects over all the way here to Europe and Africa. This goes through the Sassanid Persian territory, so we start seeing them show back up in the picture. And it's a good time for Tibet during this role. You mentioned that they were able to grow some hardy crops like sorghum, while other flora and fauna was available for food. So they did have some other crops, but it's mostly going to be derived from their herds, right? So again, sheep and yaks and even horses. I know a lot of people are like, you don't eat horses, but you can totally eat horses. It wasn't their prevailing dietary staple, but in a pinch, eat the horse, right? So they didn't really have tuber crops, so you don't see, like a lot of, well, of course they didn't have potatoes. That's a New World crop. But they had some trade, and they could bring in some fruit. They also had some stuff that was left over. If you get closer to this region over here, you start running into olives, which had been brought over by the Greek presence that was in Central Asia here for several hundred years. You can eat nearly anything with muscle mass. Correct. That is correct. So they had a fairly heavy meat and bread based diet. They did butter, they did drink milk, that kind of stuff. You would be curious about tasting yak meat. I would be down for a yak burger. I would eat a yak burger or a yak steak. I would guess that it would taste fairly similar to beef. I don't know the taxonomic classification of a yak, but I would suspect that it's not too terribly far from the larger bovine families. Yak cheese. Yeah, I'd be down with that. I would be down with some yak cheese. I'm pretty adventurous when it comes to eating. What was their vitamin C source? Lumpy, that's actually a great question, and I don't know the answer to it. I know that they did, when they started trading, bring in some vitamin C stuff, but I don't know what that would have been naturally. That's a great question, and I do not know. Um, but I could look that up. I don't know if I would do that like right now on stream, but I'll look that up and maybe put that in the Discord if I can think about it. If somebody wants to shoot a message like, what's up with vitamin C for the Tibetans? I would bet some sort of fruit, but I don't know what specific that fruit would have been. My brain keeps going back to dates, but I don't think that's it. That doesn't make sense geographically or climatically. I don't know. Inuits eat the brains of seals. Huh. I did not know that seal brain had a lot of vitamin C in it. But monk fruit. Yes, they eat monk fruit. Exactly. The monks sit on the mountain and they think really, really hard, and then they produce fruit. That's why they have to sit still for so long, because they have to, take root and absorb nutrients. I'm just picking. I don't think that there's any such thing as monk fruit. But Namri is a pretty cool guy for the Tibetans. He is going to build a capital city. He makes his capital at Lhasa, which is in modern-day Tibet, and it would be really, really cool to go there. I would really love to spend some time hanging out in that area. Unfortunately, China doesn't really like you doing a lot of going to Tibet for Tibetan reasons. They don't like the idea that there was a whole separate culture of Tibet that wasn't Han Chinese, that existed, that beat the mess out of China several times. They don't like to talk about that. So it would be a little harrowing, probably, to spend a lot of time in Tibet doing the type of history sightseeing that I like to do. Now, of course, if you went and did all of the touristy stuff, you would almost certainly be fine. I'm Spartacus. Kyle, what's up, my friend? I'm Spartacus. Good to see you, Kyle. Thank you so much for that subscription. It is much appreciated. And thank you for being Spartacus for another month. You're checking your source to make sure you're not bull plopping. That's great. Gone for the eyes, maybe. Vitamin C. That's a fair pun. Also, they swim in the ocean, so that's vitamin SEA. I would have accepted that as an acceptable pun as well. Tibet looks like a dry, rocky region today from what you have seen. Has it always been that way? So Tibet suffers from this thing where when you take pictures of it, you're almost always going to get pictures of the arid period. There is a rainy season where things get really, really green really, really fast. And then you have a sort of longer dry spell where the green sort of dies off. And you have a large period of the time where it's very, very brown. And you don't get a lot of overwhelmingly big vegetation, right? There aren't a whole bunch of big trees. You're not going to run into an overwhelmingly large amount of giant forests in Tibet. But again, down here in the southeastern corner, you're going to see a lot more of that. Usually people like to show pictures of like the monasteries, the Buddhist monasteries from Tibet, and those are almost always in very secluded areas up on the tops of mountains. So there's a little bit of a selection bias going on there. But I showed this picture earlier of the valley where Namri Songtsen would have been born, and you can see here that they've got some vegetation, right? So they've got some trees, they've got a water supply that's a river that runs right here. They've got some fields that they can grow some stuff in. Of course, this is not taken during the greenest of the period. But you know, they've got water supply, they've got land that is arable, but not like the best arable land ever, and they can get by in most of Tibet. Now, if you get up into the really high, like steppe areas, that's up here, basically in what is the Gobi Desert, or the highest part of the Tibetan Plateau, that does get really, really rugged. But most of the population isn't going to live up that way. Most of the population of Tibet is going to be down here in the southeastern corner, sort of in this pocket right around here, and then right around this region right here where this sort of spits out into Central Asia and you get a lot of trade moving through. But this region is probably the least inhabited region of what will be the Tibetan Empire. And you can just tell, like, if let's pick right here, right? If we zoomed in right here, there aren't even modern people living in this area. All right, let's see if we can find a modern city. Do we have anything around this lake right here? Nope. Nope. Right, so like there aren't even modern people living in this zone. And we're at an elevation of about 11 miles here, so we can see really, really far. Right. So I hope that answers your question, Moose. Also, Moose, good to see you. There's a fruit called monk fruit, and we make a natural low-calorie sweetener from it. Oh, cool. Well, there we go. It's seal liver and whale skin and a mountain plant when it's in season. Ah. It's probably more or less scripted by the government, quite possibly. Everybody Spartacus. Nature's first hue, right? So how in the 500s were they able to sustain populations with long dry seasons? They're starting mostly down here. If we look at Lhasa, I'll pull up the location and then stop myself. So we're starting down here, right? In the habitable, much more green parts of Tibet, specifically in this valley right here, which has a constant water source because of the mountains that are feeding it with rainfall and snowfall that's melting. And you can support a population down here. But even then, the population was not enormous, right? They're not going to have tens of millions of people in Lhasa. It's a small city comparative to other international or in other national capitals. Seems Tibet has berries called goji berries. I've heard of goji berries. They are behind a dry mountain ridge. Yeah, pretty much. The semi-green area, yes, the semi-green. You fixed yourself, so for some reason my stream was bugged. Ooh. Yeah, I must have just needed to do a refresh because I'm not getting my... Usually when I drop frames or have slowdowns, I get all of the little bells and whistles that start yelling at me like, you're doing it wrong! So, he builds himself a capital city, he builds himself a big palace, and he's on the move trying to build some new stuff and put together a larger empire. And a bunch of his enemies get really sick of this Namri Songtsen guy, and they decide, we're going to kill him. So they do. And I spelled this wrong. It's Songtsen. So they kill him. Lhasa Apso, yeah. The silent eight, well, it's kind of like a breathy. It's not Lhasa, it's like Lhasa. But yeah, that the big Tibetan bull mastiff looking dog. Namri gets assassinated in 618. And he gets killed. Now, what to do? Well, he does have a son. and his name is Songtsen Gampo. Somebody can do assassin command if they want to. He is going to take over, and he rules 618 to 650. And when he becomes emperor, his dad had just been murdered. So he's got a bit of a job to do, right? He's got to go hunt down all the murderers. Oh, and by the way, this is kind of a rough picture of Songtsen Gampo. It's hard to find photos of a lot of these people. Again, part of this is because China doesn't really like Tibet very much. And part of this is because it's still pretty early and they're not necessarily making lots of statues, which is kind of something that they share a little bit with China. This is, of course, a much later image. This is an image that comes from several hundred years after he's dead. So whether or not he actually looked like this is debatable. But it was the oldest one that I could find. So you see him there depicted in very Buddhist sort of dress and style, and there's a reason for that, because this guy is going to be really important for the expansion of Buddhism. Now, the region of Tibet itself had its own system of local deities, and Buddhism had been sort of bumping into their world for a little while, and along the borders of Tibet you could see a little bit of syncretism happening where some of the local people would say, okay, so our gods are really these sort of semi-divine Buddhist beings, and we can sort of take Buddhist teaching and blend it with our local flavor of religion and be okay. But Gampo is going to do that on steroids. He's really going to be a big pusher of Buddhist expansion. He does a lot to promote both the expansion of Buddhism through building things like temples and monasteries, but he also does a lot of stuff to promote the syncretism between local Tibetan gods and translating them to existing figures already within the larger Buddhist sort of pantheon of spirits. And he, because of this great work for spreading Buddhism in Tibet, is actually going to be considered by later Buddhists as an incarnation of one of these divinities, right? So he is one of these sort of divine beings that is ascended past humanity, but not quite at nirvana, that gets reincarnated purposefully in human form to spread Buddhism. He's a pretty important figure in Tibetan Buddhism, and he is going to be one of four people that are sort of considered the fathers of Tibetan Buddhism. And it's during this period of time that Tibetan Buddhism begins to not completely build its own little version of Buddhism, but there's already going to be signs, if you know the whole story, that Tibet is going to begin developing its own flavor of Buddhism. So I don't know how much you all know about the history of Buddhism, but today there are sort of three, maybe four, depending on how you want to count them, really big flavors of Buddhism or denominations. Tibetan Buddhism is a little bit different than both the Buddhism that you might find in China and the Buddhism that you might find in Southeast Asia and the Buddhism that you might find in Japan. So the Dalai Lama is a Buddhist figure, but he's really only a Buddhist figure inside of the Tibetan Buddhist particular version, which is called Vajrayana. And there's a little bit of a different flavor. It's a little bit more open to bringing in other texts from other regions, especially Hindu texts from India. Yeah, right. So it's in northern parts of India as well. And even the name Vajrayana, and this is actually something I was talking about in Lumpy's stream the other day. So one of the deities in Hinduism is a deity called Indra, who's sort of like the ruler depending on how you view Hinduism, which there are like 9 or 10 different versions of Hindu faith. Hinduism is a bad name for it, but if you want to go read about that or learn about that, I can help you on a later stream, or you can go watch the VOD for Hinduism. Indra has this thunderbolt that is used to strike the wicked, very Zeus-like, if you get the comparison there. And the thunderbolt itself is called the Vajra. And so Vajrayana means thunderbolt vehicle. And it is the way that you get to Nirvana. You get aboard the thunderbolt vehicle. It's really interesting stuff. And I really enjoy the history of Buddhism. And I've covered this in some detail, a little bit of detail on the history of Buddhism stream. But as always, if you have questions about this stuff, I'd be happy to answer. So Songtsen Gampo, really big on the Buddhist front, but he's also going to be big on the expansion front. So Namre Songtsen is important for getting the ball rolling. It's really going to be his son that firmly puts everything on the map. Gampo is going to hunt down the people that killed his father and kill them. And then he's going to begin wars of expansion. And he's going to be a lot more active militarily than his father was. And he's going to expand in basically all the different directions from his home base in Tibet. Against China even. So at this point, China was being ruled by the Tang Dynasty, which we talked about last week. Tang Dynasty was really big and powerful. And Tibet at that point had a fairly sizable chunk of territory for itself, so much so that insert Princess Pride, you killed my father meme here. Yeah, pretty much. Princess Bride, I get you. Yeah, so hello, my name is Songtsen Gampo. You killed my father, prepare to die. Right? I am also right-handed, or left-handed. I can't remember which one it is. Or I can also fight left-handed. I can't remember what the exact quote is, but you know what I'm talking about. Somebody will correct me in the chat, and I'll feel bad about not having the entire movie memorized like I think I should because, nerd credit. I've fallen prey to one of the classical blunders of not memorizing a popular movie. So Gampo actually sends word to the Emperor of China, who at this point is this guy named Taizong, and he goes, I want to marry somebody in the royal family. And this is actually something that China had been doing for several hundred years. If you were a regional area that was either under Chinese vassalage or a potential threat to China, and they felt like they could maybe buy you off, you got to marry a high-ranking Chinese wife. And this is an interesting moment because when Gampo makes this request, it shows us that, at least in his mind and in the minds of perhaps the Tibetan court, that they thought they were big enough to be a regional power, right? Like, we're on the map now. We're playing the game the right way. And China tells them no. He's like, you are not part of the game. You do not get a royal wife. And you go back to doing your things there in the valleys. And Gampo's not going to take that very well. This is actually going to be a big insult to him. And he's going to feel like he has to sort of prove that he's, player 2 has entered the game. So what is he going to do? Well, he decides to kind of hit China where it hurts. And that is in the trade, right? If you want to hit somebody where it hurts, you kick them in the trade. Everybody says between the legs, but trust me, kick them in the trade. That's how you get an empire to hurt. What's up, Ann? I was in Ann's chat until probably, almost 2 a.m. This morning. No, not quite that late. About a little bit past 1 a.m. this morning. We were having a good chat. Everybody should go follow Ann. So Tibet's going to focus on this region right here. And I've mentioned this area a lot of times on stream in the past. This region right here is referred to as the Tarim Basin, Tarim, and it's critical to the Silk Road, right? Coming out of China, you go up, follow this river valley, you follow this cleft in the mountains, and then you pick. Do you go north or do you go south? But along the rim of this big region, there are cities. And along the rim of this basin right here on the southern part, there are also cities. And if you hold these cities, these are trade cities. The biggest reason that they exist is to transfer goods that are coming out of Central Asia to China and to transfer goods coming out of China to Central Asia. And if you hold these kingdoms, they're more like city-states. Let's just be honest. They're not actually kingdoms. But if you hold these city-states, you get the profits. You get the proceeds of the tax. You get the access to the coolest stuff. And at that point, China had this region. But Tibet, boop, is right here. And so they decide, we're going to go take this southern part. We're just going to go and swallow that up. And they do, and man, this makes China really upset. And so China's like, okay, we're going to go kill you. And so Taizong packs up this big army and sends them out to defeat Gampo. But the Tibetan army beats the Chinese army. And this is kind of like a recognition moment for China, like, oh crap. About that wife thing, do you still want that wife? And Gampo's like, yeah, okay, we'll call a truce, and you'll send me a wife. And that's exactly what happens. So Songtsen Gampo now got a Chinese wife, but he's not done because, and that, by the way, is in the year 640. So this actually takes a little while through Gampo's career. He's going to marry the emperor's niece, which is a pretty good pick. Like, if you were going to draft ancient world picks, you really can't do better than emperor's wife or daughter. So those, I'm sorry, emperor's sister or daughter. So those are sort of like S rank, and then the next is niece. That's pretty close to the emperor. So it's a pretty important thing, and I know that what I just did was potentially something that could be looked at as incredibly misogynistic. I don't think women's value has anything to do with the people to whom they're related. I think every person is intrinsically valuable just because they are a human being, so don't come after me for being some sort of super misogynist. I was attempting to explain that the fact that Songtsen Gampo married the emperor's niece was a designation by the Tang dynasty that he was like a legitimate player in the international game. He didn't get some fourth cousin's college roommate kind of situation. He was from the imperial family, or he married somebody from the imperial family. That's a pretty big deal. You can make jokes, but you like it here, so you're not going to say it. You're not going to offend me. As long as it's, you can say what you want to, but I don't think anybody's going to get super duper offended. I need to sneeze. That was a bad one. I've been sneezing just like randomly today. That's not something that I normally do. Also, Gampo is going to move further south, specifically down into this region right here along the Himalayan area, or the Himalayan mountain range, and even a little bit down here into the other side of the Himalayan mountain range, because this region right here, which is modern day Nepal, if we throw up the modern borders, right? So Nepal sits right here. This region was controlled by a pretty powerful family called the Lichavis. and we've talked about them in previous streams, but very basically they were a fairly noble family in that region that had a kingdom that had been around for a couple hundred years. And Songtsen Gampo wants a connection to the larger Indian subcontinent and would love to control some of these passes through the Himalayan mountain ranges. And he knows that the Lichavi were having a bit of a problem, so he waits until there is a big dynastic dispute inside of their country and there's a civil war that breaks out, and then he tries to get in the middle of it and realizes, no, I'll just take it over. So he's going to pacify the Lichavi Nepalese kingdom and sort of bring that into the larger Tibetan empire. And that's going to be a pretty big move because that's going to give him a lot of access to the rest of India and give future Tibetan rulers access to even here the Gangetic Plain. If we fast forward into the 800s, Tibet's going to control a big portion of this region right around in here, and this is sort of the first move across the mountains. Also, hey, Macaroni and Brie, I don't think I said hello. Did I say hello to everybody? Now I'm feeling like I didn't say hello to everybody. Hey, Techman, good to see you, my friend. Hope you're having a good day. I've been bad about saying hello to people. Hello there, Hilton Preacher. What's up? Hey, Nom Nom Nom, good to see you. Howdy, howdy. I try to say hello. You're a person. I appreciate you being here. Least I can do is say hello. So, there we go. All right. Hope everybody's having a good one. Feel free, as always, to ask questions, participate, do your thing. Throw your bad puns in. Do what you need to do. All right. So, we're going to see lots of expansion under Songtsen Gampo. We're going to see politics being played pretty well against China. Big conquest on the other side of the mountains to get parts of Nepal, and a big push towards Buddhism. So this guy does a lot. He does a lot. He's a pretty big guy when it comes to establishing Tibet as a lasting power, right? So he gets old, dies of natural causes, and leaves the throne. Well, he doesn't actually get very old. He dies when he's like in his 30s. I don't know why I said he got old. That's usually what happens when you die, but not always. Mongsong Mongsen. So his son takes over. But his son at that time was a kid, right? No, wait a second. Now I'm even getting myself confused because there's this dynastic dispute here. I apologize. I need to get my head back in the game. Okay, so Songtsen Gampo had a son that was supposed to be his heir. And his son died young. That's where I was. And his grandson is Mongsong Monsen. And his grandson took over as a kid. That's where I lost myself. Because there's actually a... How do I... Okay. Here's like a peek behind the curtain of history. There's a big argument about the Tibetan dynastic succession between Songtsen Gampo and Mongsong Mongsen, because we have conflicting written sources, and we don't know which one of them to trust. So some sources say that before Songtsen Gampo died, he made his son sort of like co-emperor and then kind of acted as retired emperor for a few years. So his son ruled for like 5 years, and then his son died and the grandson took over. The other source says that Songtsen Gampo's son died prior to taking over, which is why his grandson had to take over. And honestly, it's a really big argument, and there are a lot of people on both sides, and there's good evidence to support both sides. And I don't know if we'll ever know because it was a long time ago. We don't have a conclusive, multi-sourced, backed thing. Now, tomorrow, because I said that, they'll go find a coin that was minted with this guy's face on it. That's a regnal coin that showed that he ruled for 4 years or something like that, and then I'll look like an idiot. But that's kind of what happens in history. It's okay sometimes to go, we don't really know. So there we go. But we do know that either in 650 or maybe 655, depending on how we date his father's potential rule or not, this kid becomes emperor. Now, this thing is pretty neat, and this is one of the things that I would really like to go see. So, in the Yarlung Valley is this big tomb, and this is the tomb of Songtsen Gampo that was built either under his son's rule or his grandson's rule. I tried really hard to find better photos of this. It's very hard to find photos of the monument itself up close because it's got lots of like Buddhist relics in it. Like there's a little niche in here that's got some Buddhist stuff. Again, some of this is because China doesn't like a lot of things being posted. A lot of people don't go to this area to do touristy stuff. But if I were going to go, this is a thing that I would take a lot of pictures of, and I would put them for free on the internet. But this is the tomb of Songtsen Gampo, and it's really big. This photograph doesn't necessarily do it a lot of justice. But it is a pretty interesting site, and it became a Buddhist pilgrimage site pretty soon upon his death. Because, again, this guy is really, really important when it comes to Buddhism in Tibet. Yes, I am a person. Personally, you don't expect a hello because I usually initially interact with a question or a comment. That's fine, Techman. I still like to say hello. How old was he when he became a king? Because that was 30. Yeah. So it was my goof up. I confused myself. So anyway, Mongsong Mansen is the emperor, and he is young, like kid level young, not capable of ruling. And he's going to be put under the regency of another guy whose name is quite long. I don't know if I can even fit it in here. Let's try. Hey, I can. I could barely fit it in there. All right, so we've got Emperor guy, and then below him is the regent guard, Tongsen Yulsung, who looks like this. Well, let me asterisk that. We think he might look like this. What does that even mean? Okay, well, Guard Tongsen had been a pretty big, important official under the previous two rulers. He had initially been a pretty big supporter of Namri Songtsen, and he had been a general and ambassador under Songtsen Gampo. And this particular image comes from China, from the Tang Dynasty, and we know that it was an ambassador from Tibet. So by process of suspicion, we suspect that this is Gar Tongsen Yulsung. Now, can we confirm that? No, we can't. But there's a decent chance. And if he didn't look exactly like this, you can probably get the dress. He would have probably been dressed like that. He would have probably had the headband and his hair cut like this, with the beard and the mustache like this. Even if this is not directly Gar Tongsen Yulsung, it probably looks a lot like the way that he would have appeared as an ambassador to Tang Dynasty China. Again, it's hard to find photos of this period. So, what up with this guy? So, Gar Tongsen Yulsung is a really important regent. He had a lot of experience. He had fought in the military. He had been around during some of the diplomatic relationship stuff. He had been an ambassador to foreign countries. So he sort of had experience in all of the different areas of running a country. And when he took over as regent, he's actually really good at it. So many times in history when we get regents, they suck, right? They're horrible people. They weaseled their way into being regent because, they were married to somebody or their kid was something, and all they really want is power, and they're jerk faces and they ruin the country. This guy's actually really legit. So one of the first things that he starts to do is conduct a census of the empire. He wants to know how many people are living within the borders of the Tibetan Empire. And the reason he does that is because he wants to effectively tax them. And he's going to pass a whole bunch of tax reforms with this new data that's going to sort of make it easier to live in the larger Tibetan Empire, right? You don't want certain areas that are being good to, like they're pacified, they're participating. You don't want them to have some wildly drastic tax rate when somebody that's being a jerk has lower tax rates. But you got to figure out who they are, blah, blah, blah. It's the good old bureaucracy stuff that he has to do. He's also going to codify Tibetan law. And he was in a fairly unique position to do this because, again, he had experience in these previous dynasties, and he had been around for a lot of the imperial edicts that came out in the first place. But he's going to collect this and publish and disperse the first written Tibetan law code, which is really important because this is, again, going to begin to centralize the empire. And he's also going to expand territory. He's going to expand against China, and he's going to take back that little southern rim of the Tarim Basin. He's going to add this back to the empire, which is bringing in a lot of money, which is actually part of the larger tax reform deal because they're making so much money from trade that they can lower the taxes in other areas to keep conquered people pacified. He's a really smart dude. Really smart guy, does a lot to solidify the station of the empire and continue it in good faith. But eventually the emperor is going to get old, and Mangsong Mansen wants to run the country himself, so he pulls a bit of a Bismarck. If you know Otto von Bismarck and you know anything about the creation of Germany as a unified country, you'll know that Kaiser Wilhelm I relied very heavily on Otto von Bismarck's statecraft, politics, military experience, economic know-how, bureaucratic know-how. And then when Kaiser Wilhelm II got rid of Otto von Bismarck, just a few years later, we ended up with World War I, right? Mangsong Mansen is going to force his son, or his advisor, to retire. And he sends him off into retirement, and Mangsen's like, I'm running the empire now. Everyone relied on Bismarck, including foreign nations not trying to start World War I. Yeah. I mean, the Berlin Conference alone was basically his child, which kept everybody from blowing other European countries up while in Africa. Wasn't so great for Africa, but it kept the European powers from killing each other in Africa. Pretty big, not so great guy. Anyway, Gartongsen Yulsung is going to die in 667, just a couple years after he gets pushed out. But Mangsong Mansen is going to decide it's time to continue expanding. We're going to keep going. We're going to add more stuff. We're going to conquer more places. We're going to take over the world. And so he continues this push. And he is going to actually move up and take the entire Tarim Basin, not only just the southern rim, but he's going to add the northern rim to it as well. So Tibet at that point is going to control all of the Tarim Basin trade route. And as a way to sort of solidify that, they're going to start trying to invade China, especially this northern part of China, kind of coming out of this direction. And Bismarck later became a pastry. I don't know what. I don't know if I've ever had a Bismarck pastry. What type of pastry is it? Is it like a sweet pastry? Or is it like a biscuit kind of thing? I know he's got some islands named after him, but that doesn't have anything to do with pastry. What's a Bismarck? That's an interesting question. I don't actually know what a Bismarck is. I get to learn great things. like seal livers are high in vitamin C and whale skin, right? And Bismarck is a pastry. This is great stuff. Anyway, so in 676, our boy Mangsong Monsen is going to begin this invasion of China. And along the way, he's going to get pretty sick. And he dies. And this is a weird situation because the nobles of Tibet actually get kind of freaked out. And the governor, I'm sorry, not the governor, but the generals are like, oh crap, the emperor's dead. But the thing is, they were actually doing fairly well on this invasion of China. It's a sweet donut without the hole and filled with jam. Ah, okay. And it's a ship, yes, the Bismarck, right? A cream, lots of carbs. I do quite like carbs. Boston cream versus Bavarian cream versus Bismarck. What's the difference? Bismarck. This premium and decadent donut includes more dough, filling, and topping due to its rectangular shape. So it's an eclair. That's the word we're looking for, an eclair. Depending on your location, the name and build of this donut may vary. Down south, they might be called a long john. That is wrong. We do not call them long johns down here down south. We call them eclairs. And it's left over from the French word. I've never heard someone refer to those as a long john. KP, have you ever heard anybody refer to them as a long john before? I've not. In the Northeast, it can be similar to a Boston cream with chocolate icing and Bavarian cream filling, resembling an eclair. Okay, so they use the word eclair, but apparently this is not. We also use the Bismarck to make fancies filled with raspberry jelly and topped with vanilla buttercream and sprinkles. That actually sounds delightful. I love donuts. I am a gigantic donut fan. Is Duncan propaganda? Yes, Long John is underwear. Exactly. Exactly. You have, but it's a northerner telling me that's what I call it. Okay. Germ assassination. It wasn't germ assassination. He just that implies that they targeted him with a biological weapon. Schwanheit. I don't think that they were quite so sophisticated. Eclairs are made from chaud dough. You have it. Okay. Eclair au chocolat. Yeah. Duncan propaganda, burn the witch. You pronounce it eclair. That's probably closer to the actual French pronunciation, eclair. But I live in the deepest part of the Deep South, and I'm not too far from New Orleans, and New Orleans doesn't really speak French anymore. They speak Creole, which is based in French, but very much not French. So I pronounce it eclair, which is, I feel like, the regional correct pronunciation. Yes, it's what KP said. It is a highly specialized regional dialect of French. That is also got mostly a lot of English stuff. Infernal is correct because Lumpy is a Quebecer and actually does speak French. Eclair. My French is pretty bad. I can get by a little bit, but what ends up happening, and this happens almost all the time, and it's really weird for me, I'll start trying to say something French, and I'll forget the French word, and I'll just sort of fill in a Spanish word. Because, it's a foreign language, and I know Spanish the best, so... Oh, dude, we go off on food tangents all the time. Food is one of the easier ways to get me off on a tangent. I do quite like food. It's all Latin, right? Tropical, right? It's close enough, right? I tried. All right, so when Mong Song Mong Sen dies, they're in the middle of this Chinese invasion, and the general decides, we're just not going to tell anybody. We're just going to shut up about it, and we're not going to tell anybody. Because they didn't want China finding out that the emperor was dead and going, now's the perfect time to go conquer Tibet, while they're overextended. So for about 3 years, they don't tell anybody that the emperor's dead. And they kind of just like, shh. So Weekend, yeah, exactly. Weekend and Long Songs, right? They're going to put his son on the throne. Whose name is Tirdu Songtsen. I don't think that's correct. I think it's actually Tridu, and I have a typo on my notes here. Let me just double check that. I think it's Tridu. Pretty sure it's Tridu. It is Tridu, and I have an error on my notes. This is what happens when I do notes, and I'm not really paying attention. I spell things wrong. Let's just be honest. I probably could have gone the whole stream and not corrected my typo there, but, you know, it's a conspiracy. 3 years with Bernie, right? So Tirdu Songtsen gets put on the throne. He's 8. So he's clearly not running the show either. But our buddy, Gartongsen Yulsung, had a son. And his son is going to end up taking over as regent. So during this kid's rule, which lasts from 676 to 704, they're basically going to be at war with China all the time. And it's going to be over the control of this region on the eastern border right here and over the Tarim Basin. China really, really, really wants to hold this region. They don't want to give it up. It costs them so much money to lose it. It costs them a lot of money to take it back, because if we're just being honest here, right? The capital of China is way over here. To send an army the size that you would need to take the Tarim Basin and hold it all the way over here, that costs a lot of money. Let's do some map rolling here. Now, this is going to be in miles, and I'll do it in kilometers for our friends that do metric. So if we're just roughly going from the furthest point of the Tarim Basin over here to our heartland of China, this is 2,300 miles or 3,750 kilometers, right? And that's in a straight line. So they're moving further than that, because you can't walk in a straight line in this area. They are moving these troops thousands of miles or kilometers away. It's expensive to go fight over there. How many parsecs is that? I don't know, but I bet the Millennium Falcon could fly it pretty fast. KP is trying to rickroll me. Yes, or desert it. Correct. But this is a big play, and they do fight over this for a long time. They're going to lose control in 677. The Tang Dynasty takes this back over. I'm sorry, other way around. Tibet controls the whole area by 677. There's a big war, and they lose part of it. Then they're going to lose all of it by 690. And they're going to start trying to take some of it back. It's just a big mess. And when the time comes for Tridu to sort of do his own job, and rule on his own, The ruler of China at this point is a lady named Wu Zetian. We talked about her last week. Is a spectacular ruler of China, very, very powerful, and most unfortunately evident of her power is the fact that she was a ruling empress without claimants trying to knock her off or make her try to marry somebody. And Tridu, having been worn down over the course of 20 years of fighting with China, is going to try to get them to come to the negotiating table. So he's going to send messages to Wu Zetian and say, look, we need to do something, right? You're tired, I'm tired, it sucks. And so she says, what's your terms? And he goes, I want you out of Central Asia. Basically, I want you to give this away, right? You stay over here, and we're going to do our thing here. You stay out of here. And that's sort of a non-starter to begin with. And then they also go one step further and go, and we also want the Go Turks. Specifically the Western Go Turks. We want them to be our vassal instead of your vassal, so you got to give up control of the Go Turks. And Wu Zetian is like, no, never going to happen. And they just keep on fighting. But the reason I mention this is because this is recorded in both sets of histories. So the fact that Wu Zetian, who had really not given anybody else the time of day, would sit down and try to at least give them the token gesture of maybe making a peace treaty is a sign that they're probably pretty tired of this war, right? Dormammu, I've come to bargain, right? Pretty much. So Tibet's in a pretty powerful spot, but China is the big, bad, scary thorn in their side that they can't really get rid of. And for our purposes, Tridu Songtsen, when he rules until 704, is going to be the last of the Tibetan leaders that we talk about. But we are not done. I should show you this. This, by the way, is a big lion statue that is also in the Yarlung Valley, not too far away from where Tridu was buried. And we suspect that this was part of the grave decorations for his kind of larger mausoleum. Yeah, I know. It's artistic. It's a lion. Just, you can see the mane. It's got a curly mane. Look. Whee! Anyway. So by the time we get to our 700 mark, here's where we stand. We've got the Tibetan Empire, which is holding a pretty big chunk of territory. We've got the Chinese Empire over the Tang Dynasty, and you can see how they're stretching out over here into projecting power into the Tarim Basin. And this is a pretty big chunk of territory that they control now. And this actually shows the rivers fairly well. So I know there was a question earlier about how are these people having water? Now, you can see that there's some rivers that run through here. Now, they're not as big as something, again, like the Yangtze or the Yellow River, but it's got some water supply. It's a fashionable lion, indeed. All right, so before we step out for the night, we do need to check in with the Turks, specifically the Go Turks, who are... I made the joke last time, and I'll make the joke again. They are a pretty powerful group of Turks, and they are way better than the Gobots. Right? Gobots, of course, were sort of a knockoff Transformers for young children. Go Turks are legit, much more than the Gobots were. We should cheer them on. Go Turks, indeed. So we've talked about them before. I'm sorry, I got something in my eye for some reason, kind of bugging me. In the last time that we came around to talk about the Turks, they had established themselves a big empire, and then almost immediately their empire split into an eastern half and a western half. But technically they were referred to as the Turkic Khaganate, led by a Kagan. I guess I have notes where I could type things instead of typing stuff in chat. So this is like Khan, you know, these nomadic steppe leaders. But the Turks are organized, they're numerous, and they're pretty powerful. And they're somebody that had been causing a lot of trouble in places like China, Tarim Basin, and Korea. Right? So they've got a big chunk of territory that basically stretches from the Pacific all the way over to the Caspian, and they control sort of this whole region right here. It's a big stretch of territory. And they had split right about here. So this was kind of the Eastern Turkish territory, and this was the Western Turkish territory. And part of that split was because of China. And this is going to be something that the Sui dynasty actively tried to do, right? They recognized that the Turks, when they were unified, were a very big problem, and the Sui dynasty, through the end of the 500s and into the early 600s, were going to actively try to cause trouble within the larger Turkic Khaganate. They're going to try to find younger brothers or sons that are ready to try to rule themselves, and they're going to try to promote them as either claimants to the throne, or they're going to start wanting to only work with these people. And this, of course, stirs up all this trouble back at, you know, Turkish home base. And when the empire does split in 603, or the Khaganate splits in 603, this is something that China kind of revels in. They're very excited about this. Like, we have successfully driven a wedge between the two big Turkish groups, which is going to give us the benefit of now only having to fight one of them at a time, most likely. And they're going to bring the Eastern Turks into the larger vassaldom of China. And they're going to do this through intermarriage. They're also going to do this through things like bribes, giving them fancy titles that don't really mean anything. So the Eastern Turks are going to be kind of aligned with China. So let's talk about what's going on with the West for a moment. We'll come back to the East because they're going to actually have a bit of a longer go of things. But when the East and the West split, these Turks decide that it's time to do something a little bit different. We've been trying to conquer this region of Northern Asia, get over here into China, but what about all of this stuff down here in Central Asia? Specifically, what about all of this region right here? And again, if you are keeping up with geography, if this region is important for trade, why is this region important? And if you guessed pretty horses, you are correct. Also, lots of trade. The big cities that are in this area, especially in places like Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, there are just tons of big cities that are making tons of money, especially Samarkand. If you've ever played Final Fantasy X, Zanarkand, where Titus is from, is a knockoff of Samarkand, which is an actual city in modern-day Uzbekistan that I would love to go see. But that's, you know, me being me. So, these Western Turks, what are they going to do? Well, they decide we're going to expand south. And that means they're going to have to fight against Persia. And the Persians are not really ready for this. They don't really necessarily see the Turks initially as a big deal until they are a big deal. And the Turks are going to move into this region right here and this region right here, and they're going to take a big chunk of this territory. I've got a map that will show us. So we've moved in, and this group right here, the Tokhara Yabgus. So a Yabgus is a sort of a prince in the Turkic languages. And then we see here Turk Shahis that actually have themselves a little bit of a territory that they carve out here in modern-day Afghanistan. So they set themselves up some little satellite kingdoms. And you go, why would anybody want to hold that area? Well, here's the great thing about it. This little geographic feature right here is your gateway to India. if you want to trade with India, you need to hold this little gap in the mountains, which is exactly where the Turks set up base camp. So they've expanded. They have a lot of this territory up here. They're going to take a lot of this territory right here around the Oxus River. Everybody knows the Oxus River, right? Runs like right around here. Duh. I'm just picking. I know that I'm a weird and I know all these weird rivers and stuff like that. But the Oxus River, for a long time, it's sort of been the natural northern and eastern boundary of the Sassanid Persian Empire. When they crossed it, they were moving into Persian territory. That's going to be a pretty big deal. The Persians are blindsided by this, by the way. They've also got a whole bunch of other problems that are about to show up with these Arab people that are this new religion called Islam, and we'll talk about them later on in this phase. But anyway, so the Western Turks are going to expand down in here. They're going to stranglehold a lot of this trade, and this is going to bring a whole bunch of attention to them. And this is unfortunately not going to sit well for some of the rulers. They have a pretty big run of things from the early 600s, like 628 or so, is going to be sort of their high water mark under this guy named Tongyabgu Kagan. Everybody knows all these people's names. But anyway, that guy ends up getting assassinated by his uncle. So, fun stuff. But when they do this and they start strangleholding the trade in the region, it's going to bring everybody else's attention. And specifically, it's going to bring China's attention. China's attention. And China is going to march themselves all the way over here to try to fight these people. And if you were with us last week when we talked about the Tang Dynasty controlling parts of Central Asia, the reason that they came over there is to break up this Western Turkic stranglehold on trade. And they're going to invade in 650, and they're going to set a lot of this region in disarray. There are Arab invasions in 652 and 653 that is going to break the Turkic control of the region right here, which is referred to as Tokharistan. We would call it today part of northern Pakistan or Afghanistan. This region right around in here. And then there's a second Tang invasion in 657 that not only invades, but it also destroys the last of the Western leaders. And at that point, the little bit of remaining Western Go-Turks are going to run up here into this region right around the northern part of the Caspian Sea, but they are no longer unified. So the Western Khaganate is going to end in 657. Legend Adventure Hat. If you're saying that the Adventure Hat is legendary, it's very much real. Now, what about the Eastern Turks? Because I said that we would come back to them. They're actually a lot more successful. So the Sui dynasty starts falling apart in the early 600s. And by the 616, 617 mark, the Eastern Turks are going to rebel against the Sui dynasty. And they're going to reestablish themselves a little bit of an independent territory. But when the Tang dynasty officially takes over, the Tang dynasty is going to be very much, no, you Eastern Turks don't get to be independent. You are our vassals. You are coming back to our vassal. And they go, but you can't. And China goes, yes, we can. So they invade, and there's this big war between the Eastern Go-Turk Khaganate and the Tang dynasty, and China is going to kill their ruler, this guy named Ilig Khagan, in 630, and bring them back under control. And the Tang dynasty really does not treat the Eastern Go-Turks very well at all. And the Young Turks, right? So they have this group of people, and again, the Eastern Go-Turks had cities, but a lot of their people were semi-nomadic. And one of the things that China decides to do, since it has this semi-nomadic group of people sitting right up here on its border, they decide, you are our new meat shields. And anytime anybody causes trouble in the north, we're going to command you to literally pick up your population and move to where the bad guys are coming in. And we're going to do that because we own you. And that doesn't sit very well with the Eastern Go-Turks, but they can't really do very much about it because, again, the Tang Dynasty is pretty powerful. Dun 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 dun. Deviant Geek. Blah, 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 blah. Thank you so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. Please feel free to hang out, participate with whatever level of comfort that you are good with. If you want to chat, chat. If you want to lurk, do your lurk thing. But welcome. Appreciate you coming in. OMG, no deviants. The Tropical Geek and Deviant Geek can exist because they're different people. It's okay. There are different kinds of geeks out there. There are Eastern Go geeks and there are Western Go geeks. And I'm just being a jerk. So when Tibet causes trouble, the Tang Dynasty will send the Go-Turks down to fight Tibet. When the Western Turks cause trouble, the Eastern Go-Turks get sent over to fight the Western Go-Turks. When Korea needs to be invaded, guess what? They get sent over to Korea. Gogurt. I don't know if Gogurt is still a thing. Is it still a thing? Why are you having palpitations? It's better than having palpatines, right? That gives you a bad case of the Senate. It's a bad joke. Anyway, I'll just move on. But when I say that China is sending them to fight Tibet, or sending them to fight the West, or sending them to fight Korea, I literally mean that the emperors of Tang Dynasty China are commanding them to move. Like, you are semi-nomadic, pick up your stuff, move to this part. You are stationed here, move over here. Move over here. Move over here. And they're literally, like, sending these people in population. They're the Chinese Suicide Squad. They kind of are. There are a couple of times where some of the leaders will try to rebel, and it doesn't go that great for them, until this guy named Ilterish Kagan, and I'll put his name. Ilterish Kagan, who rules from 682 to 692. Ilterish started off with a little bitty rebellion. It was a pretty small rebellion. He was part of the larger ruling family of the Go-Turks. If you remember back when we first established the Go-Turks, that ruling family is called the Ashina clan. So he was connected to the Ashina clan, but he wasn't like the designated Chinese ruler, because of course China's picking their rulers. And he starts a small rebellion, but he's going to gain some momentum. And by the time we get to the 682 mark, he had established the second Turkish Khaganate. So he had sort of reestablished the Eastern Turkish Khaganate, and over the course of the next 10 years, he's going to add a lot of territory back to them. So this is a map of them under Ilterish. Now, this is not as big as the original Turkish territory, which would have extended all the way over here into sort of that Western Turk region, so on the borders with Persia. But this is a pretty big revival of a central Go-Turk Khaganate. And this is going to be a pretty big deal because this is, of course, going to start pushing on China. It's going to give the Go-Turks an ability to break away from this sort of, I don't know, what do you call those people? The pawns? They're no longer going to be pawns in the larger Chinese world. I mean, they're still going to have to recognize that China is a power, but they don't have to at that point get literally moved across the territory anymore. He is going to be able to establish a dynasty. He's going to successfully pass the throne to his brother upon his death, and this is going to kind of reestablish the Go-Turks as an independent power. So, pretty important guy, Ilterish Kagan. And I did want to show this photo because I know we love horsey photos on the stream. So this particular mural is of a Go-Turk horseback rider with the horse. This came out of a really, or I guess theoretically you could go see it if you could get into the tomb. There's this really interesting tomb in modern-day Mongolia. It's called Shorum Bumgar. Shorum Bumbagar. And it has these great murals of what a Go-Turk would have looked like from this period of time. So this is contemporary to what we would have been talking about. So you can see a little bit of the dress of the Go-Turk rider. You can see that they had pretty great rigging and, of course, stirrups. You can see the horse and all that fun stuff. So there's you a horsey picture. Not quite the chonkiest of horses. He is a bit full figure, but he is not chunky horse standard. I would say that on the chonk scale, he's a solid 5 or a 6. Chunky horse, of course, being the optimal 10. But, we like horses. There you go. So, we have talked about the Turks. We have talked about the Tibetans. And that is going to bring us to the end of our discussion for the night. Get that well-proportioned horse out of here. We want the chonky horse. Chonky horse or death. I still need to try to do something with chonky horse. I don't know what we would do with it. And I've had everybody give great examples, and then I've sat on it and done nothing with it. But if you might be new around here, chonky horse is sort of the unofficial mascot of the stream. So, all right. I'm Spartacus. Green herring. Thank you, my friend. I'm Spartacus. Thank you so much for that subscription, my friend. And congratulations on becoming Spartacus for another month. All right. So at this point, I am officially done with my portion. We've talked about the people that I wanted to talk about. We've talked about topics that I wanted to talk about. And we can, at this point, if you want to, do stuff like answer other questions about this material. If you have any other kind of questions about stuff, if you want to redeem channel points, all of that is now a good time. And of course, during the stream, if you want to do things like ask weird questions or redeem channel points, you can absolutely do that at any time that you want to. It's not necessarily just this. All right, the opinion hat has been summoned. The opinion hat is covered in puppy fluffle. All right, so for those of you that do not know, during the streams, I try my best not to stray into opinion. I try to give the facts, I try to make them interesting, and I try my best to stay as unopinionated as possible. But if you really want to know what I think, you can summon the opinion hat, which of course makes me look like I'm super opinionated. What do you think are going to be the long-term consequences of there being long-term shortages of teachers and teachers having such low pay and stressful work environments, etc.? I think the long-term effects are going to be stupider people. And I mean that with the utmost sadness. I don't like the fact that people are stupid. I chose my profession to try to unstupid people. But if you don't respect the fact that teaching is a tough job, that it takes a lot out of you, and it's not to blame for all of the failures of society, you're going to end up with stupider people because you're not going to get good teachers. We're already at a massive teacher disadvantage, and it's only going to get worse, especially in for-profit schools and higher education. When we, as a country, decided that education was a business, and therefore upper education and even now high schools should be run like businesses, you kind of miss the point. And what you're going to end up with is massively bloated administrations, corporate style punishments and bureaucratic structures for teachers who are going to be expected to hit metrics that are literally impossible to hit but look good on paper, because instead of making decisions for the betterment of students, we're going to be making decisions that make it look better on paper, because that's the only way for you to get funding so that you can have more administrators and give administrators jobs. And you're going to get a continued focus on lowering the standards so that people squeak by with the bare minimum of actual education. Because in a larger shift, culturally, what we've ended up with is looking at education no longer as a public good. And here I mean like goods and services, right? Not like it's for the betterment of the public, which it is, but education used to be seen as a public good, something held in common by the public, and it is no longer being viewed as such. It is being viewed as a private good, as in, I have purchased this, therefore it is mine. And when you do that, you're going to alienate poor people. You're going to provide lower levels of service for people that can't pay for it. The cost of colleges and private school tuition is going to skyrocket. And you're going to get a whole bunch of people that are going to not actually learn anything because they're going to say, I paid for it, give it to me. And if you're living in the country right now and going, why are people just dumber? It's because education for about the last it really got bad under George Bush 2. It had been falling out under as far back as Jimmy Carter, with some of the social programs that were started under him and continued under Reagan. But it really got bad in the invention or advocation of No Child Left Behind, where standardized test scores and metrics are now the governing factor of education, not student benefit. If you want smarter people, let teachers teach people. It turns out that if you make it past about year 3, you start developing really good skills on how to convey information to people, and that probably makes you better at it than somebody that's literally never taught in their life. Just as a general statement, I get to wear the opinion hat. I get to tell you my opinion. I personally am supportive of a whole bunch of overhauls for public education. I don't think that you should be in an administrative position at any level of education, from kindergarten through doctoral level, if you've never taught. It just makes sense to me. If you are going to be the president of a college and you've literally never taught a class in your life, how are you going to run that college effectively? You're going to basically look at it like it's a business, and you're going to look at numbers and not actual learning outcomes. We got to get away from this learning as a piece of paper kind of thing. Teaching is not a one-size-fits-all thing. Students are not cookie cutters. You can't boil an entire person down to 3 main demographics about them. It's garbage. Teaching involves relationship building, trust building, and proper conveyal of information in a way that a variety of students can absorb that information. And if you're telling people from kindergarten through 12th grade that instead of teaching, they have to cram these set of standardized questions into their students so that they can regurgitate them on a test so that that school can then get funded, that's bullcrap, and it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. All right. So, short answer, more dumb people. In the era of information, no one knows a thing, and it's unfortunate. I live in Florida. Anyone can be a teacher. It's insanity. Yeah, Florida just passed a bill where you don't even have to have an education degree to go teach. You don't even have to have a college degree. Let me say that again. You can now teach at Florida public schools without a college degree. Yeah, you have a master's and a grad certification of education, never going to work as a teacher again. Nix, I could probably describe without even knowing your situation why you decided to leave. You like teaching, but what you hate is the institutional BS. There you go, Infernal, right? Big sad, doesn't seem that there's any way out of it. There is actually a way out of it. And the way out of it is to stop making educational decisions on a governmental level and start making individualized decisions per institution. And I do mean per institution. High schools that are 6 miles away from each other in my state are dramatically different. And those schools need to be able to make decisions for their students. And does that mean I'm against big things like the Department of Education? In a way, yes, and in a way, no. There do need to be standards by which we should be able to tell whether or not schools are coming up to snuff, and I don't necessarily have a problem with the federal government being the one that is involved in that, but I am very much against the idea that one department in Washington, D.C. gets to set school policy for every single school in the nation. That is a fallacy. You cannot do that. The people that are even within the same counties have dramatically different expectations, dramatically different lives, socioeconomic statuses that are completely different, tax rates that are completely different, and what fits one school that is the model aggregate school that they look at in DC is not what fits the needs of people. More of that control needs to be turned over to local level state stuff. Yes, I know that means giving states like Mississippi or Kansas or Alabama or Louisiana more control over their school districts. And yes, I know that is potentially going to mean that they're going to try to abuse that for things like racism. I'm very much aware of that. This is why we need the federal government, to make sure that that doesn't happen. But the actual methods and setting of standards and stuff like that needs to be a little bit more regional, right? If it were down to the state or the school, yeah, and Moose is already there, right? There needs to be some level of standard that is kept, but let's just be real, right? I live in a very southern poor state. It's the poorest state in the nation, or at least usually one of the bottom 2 or 3. You can move from one side of the highway to the other side of the highway, right? So you're moving in visual distance, and in actual physical distance, you're moving less than the distance of a football field. And you can go from being in one of the worst schools in the state to being in literally the best school in the state because you've moved across a highway. You can't expect one rule to work for both of those particular schools because it just doesn't work. Sorry. The federal government asked the states to do stuff because they wanted to process. State refused to do what they were told, and each one did their own. And then you got a data point saying how many took the survey, how many answered the question. Yeah, that kind of stuff, right? There needs to be teeth behind the federal government's ability to hold states accountable. But also, you can't expect... Okay, so let's just be real. If I make educational policy for California, right? And then I make educational policy for West Virginia. Are those two policies going to work equally well in both of those locations? California is the richest state in the nation. West Virginia, one of the poorest. California, densely populated, lots of inner city, lots of big schools, lots of funding. West Virginia, the complete opposite. Lots of small schools, very low tax income rates, very low levels of income. And yet, we're going to make one policy that works in both of them. No, what you're going to end up doing is making garbage policy that tries to shoot to the middle and is a disservice to both of them. And that's what education in America has been doing since Bush 2. We've been making crap policy that tries to put both sides in a position where they get what they need and neither side gets what it needs. Neither end is served as well as it should be. And this isn't a Republican or a Democrat issue. This is money. That's what it comes down to. They've tied everything to money, and the only way to get money is to have the standardized test scores. What's up, Evolve? I'm on a bit of a rant about how bad education in America is, but, you know, it be happening like that. Everybody go follow Evolve yourself. He's a cool guy. He taught me some chess stuff the other day, and it made my brain wrinkle in a happy way. All right. This was redeemed. This is the standard question book and home study outlines. Okay, so what is this guy? So this guy is a book that came with a home study course for college if you wanted to get homeschool credit. I don't have the rest of the course. I just have the book of questions. So it's literally just a book full of questions. And every page has like 15, 20, 30 questions on it, right? You can see all this stuff. And what we do is we just go to a happy page, like, I don't know, this page. And then we go, oh, what about that question? And I don't know what that question is, but we're about to see what that question is. And if I can answer it, I'll answer it. And if I can't, we'll go look this junk up and we'll learn something together, right? Okay. What tribe of Indians captured Lachine? I have no idea. This is in a section of Canadian history. I did not know that, but Canada, our home and native land. So we're going to get to go look this up. Let's see. Is it this one? Yeah. All right. So let me do this, and we'll do this, and we'll go, and we'll just Google this. What tribe conquered Lachine, Canada? And I'm guessing that this is pronounced Lachine because it's in Canada. It might be pronounced Lachine. I don't know. But apparently there's something called the Lachine Massacre. Part of the Beaver Wars occurred when 1,500 Mohawk warriors launched a surprise attack against the small 375 inhabitant settlement of Lachine. Yeah, okay, so it's in New France. Lachine, at the upper end of the Montreal Island on the morning of August 5th, 1689. The attack was precipitated by the growing Iroquois frustration with the increased French incursion into their territory, an ongoing concern about French Marquis de Denonville's attack of 1687, and was encouraged by the settlers of New England as a way to leverage power against New France during King William's War. Now, King William's War is actually something that I'm familiar with from the American history side. What happened in this was basically an extension of some wars that were being fought over in the continent of Europe. And specifically here, this is going to be a conflict between England and France, who are on different sides of the war. And this extended into the New World with some American English settlers stirring up trouble, specifically with natives, and sort of getting them to try to go target the French. So this is kind of a larger global situation going on here. In their attack, the Mohawk warriors destroyed a substantial portion of Lachine settlement by fire and killed or captured numerous inhabitants, killing 240 of them. Well, that is pretty dramatic and definitely sucks. So, yeah, some Canadian history. The Beaver Wars were pretty bad. I was not familiar with the Lachine Massacre. part of the Beaver Wars. Beaver Wars ran from 1609 to 1701 and involves a whole bunch of French settlers against a whole bunch of native Native Americans that would have been in Canadian region. Mohawk tribe, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca. And a lot of these happened sort of along the boundary here between what would have been New France and New England, specifically here along the river right here and the Great Lakes boundaries. So interesting. I did not know that, and I got to learn something with you. That's the beauty of the standard question book. Sometimes I know it, sometimes I don't. But at the end of the day, everybody learns something, right? It's a really cool gift. That, by the way, was given to me by the guy that I went to Turkey with earlier in the year, but he's also sort of my archaeological mentor, and it was published in 1907, so it's more than 100 years old, and he found it as he was cleaning out his bookshelf, and he was like, I don't want this, but I know somebody that would, and boy, was it a great a great gift. It was a Christmas gift last year. You learned nothing. I am American. Well, guess what? Canada, it's on the American continent. It's on North America. So there you go. It wasn't going to be on a test, so you didn't learn it. Okay, well, that's fair. Also, that means your school doesn't get any funding. Evolve, if you want to know more about the Emu Wars, I did a history of colonial Australia as a viewer request stream. Let me see if I can figure out exactly what number that was, and you can go watch the VOD if you want to learn some more about it. Well, I guess from my point of view, you can, of course, read on your own. You're capable of reading, and you're quite an intelligent individual, so. Dum-dum-dum-dum-dum. Where was that? Australian colonization is viewer request number 25. So if you go back and find viewer request number 25, you can watch my take on Australian colonial history. We go all the way from the first sort of discoveries of Australia all the way through the Emu Wars, which were basically a way to show off really fancy machine guns, and then they didn't actually work very well. It's like you declare war on emus and then they win, right? All right, everybody. Anybody else have any questions or comments or redemptions or anything like that? Otherwise, I think we are going to go do ourselves a raid. Anybody got any sort of parting questions or thoughts or redemptions? You have a great night as well. JMR asks, what's in the news? Lots of stuff's in the news. I usually talk about world events, but I'll break my rule a little bit and say that I was very happy to see that the House and Senate of the United States ratified the NATO treaty to allow Finland and Sweden into NATO. We will be now sending our ratification to NATO itself. They're not automatically allowed in the way that NATO is structured. Every member has to affirm new members being added. So as different countries are doing their voting or adding their things, this is all being collected with the larger sort of centralized NATO command, and when all of the current members give their thumbs up, Finland and Sweden will get to join. So I was glad to see that. I know that's not necessarily world news, but I think it's kind of enough to be kind of world news. So these war with their animal bystander names, so disappointing, right? The Beaver Wars, the Emu Wars. The Emu Wars were actually against emu, though. The Beaver Wars were probably over beaver pelts, which was one of the larger exports from New France, and actually super stylish in the 16 and 1700s in Europe. High fashion beaver skins. Also raccoon skins for a little while. Then the mink and the sable sort of took over. But for a while, a lady wearing a beaver skin sash was in high fashion. So there's a little free nugget for you. All right, everybody, we are going to go hit a raid, and we are going to raid my friend Steve Conley, who has very graciously raided us many, many times. Steve is a great artist. He is a cartoonist on his webcomic, The Middle Age, which I give 2 big thumbs up. He's a great dude. He's really funny. He knows a lot of stuff. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He makes me laugh. So when we show up in Steve's stream, yell adventure, throw those lovely adventure hat emotes into the stream if you got them. Next time you'll definitely see me is next Thursday. I probably need to do a viewer request on Thursday, or on Tuesday, but I really don't know what I'm going to do. So I probably am going to contact some people that are maybe interested in buying some stuff, and we'll figure it out along the way. But until then, have a good one. Take it easy. Do something nice for yourself. Do something nice for somebody else too, though, right? Until then.